Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Anxiety RX podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russ Kennedy, a medical doctor who suffered from crippling anxiety for many years and finally found his way out through the help of different somatic healing. And today I have Dr. Scott Lyons with me, holistic psychologist, mind-body medicine specialist, somatic. I was talking to you earlier. It's like, it's going to take me half an hour just to reel off all your credits here. But he's written a book that I've been through twice now and I love, called Addicted to Drama, which is kind of like this Freudian repetition compulsion. Like what was troubling for you as a child, you will unconsciously replicate as an adult and do it when you don't see it. So you just create this same thing over and over and over again. So welcome, Scott. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. We chatted about 3 months ago and it was like, oh, so what have you been doing the last sort of 3 months or so?
Oh, this and that, and stirring up trouble wherever I can.
Yeah.
I've been working on a big project with my colleagues in San Diego, for a big project in San Diego with Dr. Gabor Mate and
Nice.
Dr. Peter Levine, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and a couple other somatic colleagues, really looking at doing a deep dive and looking at what is the arc of healing, knowing that there is no one universalized approach to healing, but how do you create some type of pathway at the same time that holds everyone's uniqueness within it. So we've been really exploring that together.
Yeah, what I'm seeing a lot is, there's no healing without safety. Like your brain can't come into this sort of glutamatergic growth phase without this feeling of safety. Without this feeling of safety. So, we see most, psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, if you go in there and talk to them, it's like, well, my wife's driving me crazy or my partner's driving me crazy. And it's not about what it's about, really. It's about these things from our childhood and it just comes out of us and we don't even see it. We have such a blind spot for it that we keep replicating our past. And I think that in that replication, there is a certain familiarity often with chaos. And your book kind of, touches on that a lot. So if your gravitational field pulls you towards chaos, it's going to be very difficult for you to heal.
Yeah. I mean, and this is an interesting thing because it's like chaos is the natural order of life, right? It's like from a philosophical perspective or a quantum, or from a physics perspective, it is all randomized chaos. And, a lot of what we've done in our lives is try to put order and organization into it. And the intolerance for that sometimes is anxiety. And at the same time, that there are certain individuals that are so it's their DNA. It's what the ecosystem that they grew up in, for example, that got internalized into them, that became their sense of pacing for life, for example. And suddenly that's who they become. That's who they are. They crave the familiarness of that, whether it's the way that their parents were in that chaotic way, that dramatic way that is exaggerated and intensified, that inability to be regulated. And one of the things I often say to people is like, you're around someone who's addicted to drama when instead of attuning into your regulation, they pull you into their dysregulation.
Yeah.
And we all know those people.
We all know that. I was just thinking, it's like I went through like 5 of them in my mind, like like the Terminator, it's like these are the people that do that to me. And because I'm a people pleaser, and as a physician for many years, it was like my compulsion is to heal, to help, to that kind of thing. And so of course I'm going to attract people into my life that need help. And it took me a long time to sort of start setting those boundaries. Like, this is not helping me. That's that. And that's why I burned out of medicine too, because it was so pharmaceutically driven that we would go in and sort of, okay, well, this is your problem. This is a medication that will actually numb your symptoms. But what if the symptoms are from a deeper underlying this repetition compulsion in your life? And we're just basically kind of treading water. Like, we're throwing you a life preserver in the middle of the ocean, but you're still in the frickin' middle of the ocean. Right?
Yeah.
So there's, one of the things that
is hard. Props. Like, I just gotta say, for those of us who've done it, it's just like, it's And I remember when I was writing this book too, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's an ER doctor, and he's like, "Oh, that's me," and he just said it so
Hmm.
easily, and I was like, "What do you mean that's you?" He was like, "Why do you think I chose emergency medicine? It's exciting, and the moment you get home, you're bored." And I was like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh."
And you don't have to get too connected to your patients to an emerge. That's
Mm,
what I found for emerge
yeah,
docs, like the ones that I went through med school with.
yeah,
They were very good technically, and they're very genuine people. It's not like
yeah,
but it just, they crave that kind of like instant hit. Okay, this is good. Okay, move on. And then we
yeah.
got kind of go from there. And just getting back to what we were saying earlier, like I have this little saying that, we equate familiarity with security in childhood.
Mm,
And if you
yeah.
grew up in a dysfunctional home, the
Mhm.
word familiar can be broken down into two words, family and liar, because your family lies
Mm,
to you as to what's safe. And then you will look for that quote unquote safety for the rest
yeah.
of your life. And often the relationships you get into are basically a recapitulation of that chaos, that energy, that thing where when you're smitten with someone, it's like, oh my God, And one of the
Mm,
things I say is, sometimes if you have childhood trauma, your soulmate can become your cellmate, because
mm.
you're clicked into this thing, and it's the charge that people get. And when people come in and say, oh, I've just met my soulmate, it's like, okay, well, be careful. Be careful, because they're going to
Yeah,
light up your old patterns.
I call that red flag couture, that
Mm,
we're,
nice.
that we're chasing the trauma tingles as and not really discerning between, the chemistry, the excitement that actually needs time
Yeah.
versus what trauma tingles are is like it's the excitement that you become kind of dissociated from, like you're not able to stay in the vulnerability of it, and you're so attached and attuned and magnetized to that trauma bonding, or what I more refer to as drama bonding than
Yeah.
trauma bonding, because trauma bonding is like we all do it,
Oh, sure.
I think it's actually a very normal thing to do. We know that pain is a social glue. We know that people connect and bond just as much through love as they do through pain. And there's a lot of interesting research about it. Like one that a study that came out of Australia that showed that there were two groups of college students, and the ones that dunked their hand in ice cold water and it, just enough to sting,
Mm,
versus the group that just had tepid water. The group that had the pain response bonded much quicker and were more efficient in their group work. And so, I mean, that's just one study, but it's interesting. So we bond. We bond over our shared pain experiences because that's the way we feel seen and heard. Drama bonding is when we don't just bond over the connection of experience, but we also start to like amp each other up. We throw
mm.
logs on each other's activation fire of stress. And and so we're accumulating stress as opposed to bonding over shared experience. That's drama bonding.
Yeah, and I think there is an element of trauma bonding in even healthy relationships,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah.
it just, it's part of it, and I think that's part of the excitement. And almost from a philosophical place, like we don't come together by accident. We come together. Now, the thing is, if you keep picking the same partner with a different haircut over and over and over again, after a while, you're like, oh, okay, I don't really know if I want to do it. But also, something you said earlier there was the trauma tingles. Is that akin to your concept of revving?
Oh, yeah, it could be. I never thought about it like that. So revving is the sort of activation, that's first start of like getting the energy up to go into more of the cathartic drama explosion. And it's a way of like, you see when people crisis hop, when they go from
Mm,
one negative story or one issue to the next issue, they're revving themselves up. Or there's lots of different types of revving, but like one of my favorite that I used to do was called binds rev, like, and it's like, this is actually something a client came in and said one time, but I'm going to borrow it. And she was like, my house is a mess. And I was like, well, okay, let's process that. She was like, no, 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 my house is a mess and I need to hire a cleaner. I'm like, okay, well, should we break down the steps of that to help? No, 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 you don't understand. My house is a mess. I need to hire a cleaner, but if I hire a cleaner, it means I'm lazy. I'm like, okay, so should we look at the history of no, you don't understand. I need to hire a
Yeah.
cleaner. If I hire a cleaner, it means I'm lazy. If I don't hire it, it means my house will stay a mess. And they're in this bind, they're in this loop that they can never break out of. And it keeps stirring them inside. So it literally keeps, like pumping the cortisol through. And that's what activation is. I think trauma tingles is more of a magnetism.
Mm.
It's like, ooh, I'm sexually attracted to dot dot dot. This person is so great, dot dot dot. But really, it's a magnetism towards the familiar ache, the familiar patterns. And that's the sort of like that's the difference between revving, I think, and the sort of the internal magnetism that happens in trauma tingles.
Yeah, and that because I have this theory that
Yeah.
basically we hold trauma in our body, which I'm not going to get an
Yeah.
argument from you about, and and
No.
and and what we do as children is the only place we have to go is our head. The only
Hmm.
place we have to go is distraction, rumination, this
Hmm.
kind of stuff. So we
Hmm.
rev ourselves, and then we don't want to stay in that emotional vortex or that
Exactly.
trauma, the trauma vortex. So we go into our heads and we
Hmm.
distract and we overthink, and then
Hmm.
we get locked into our addictions. Because to
Hmm.
me, I think, addictions are basically just an unholistic way of feeling pleasure that we will allow. We won't allow like holistic love because that wasn't
Hmm.
safe when we were
Hmm.
younger, but we will allow, feeling of taking an opiate or
Hmm.
taking a drug
Hmm.
or going on the internet or whatever it is. We'll allow that, but we won't allow the holistic thing. So it becomes this poor cousin. And this is one of the reasons I think that the benzodiazepines are so popular for anxiety is they allow people to actually feel safe. They actually allow them to feel connected to themselves. And it's no wonder that they're so addictive because it's the only way they kind of allow themselves to feel that. And that was the case with me.
Hmm.
The only way I would allow myself to feel that warm, comfortable connection was through a medication of some kind. And
Hmm.
then, I mean, I've been taking medications for years and years now, but I remember what it was like. And then it was like when I heard people describing heroin, it's like, it's kind of like a warm hug from your mom, It's like, okay,
Hmm.
well, that's the substitute. So it's like allowing yourself. And I think that's where addictions kind of come from in a way, is
Oh
they're
yeah.
self-soothing. And Gabor talks about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. That they fill in the void, often the void of that co-regulation, that connection that feels safe and sound. And so, yeah. So why not go into something that sort of substitutes? And that's what stress does. It
Yeah.
literally substitutes a lot of what we don't have, or a lack of safety. And if you're listening to this and you're going, wait, why would we become attached or dependent on stress to feel better? You're asking the right question. And if you're
Mm.
puzzled, let's break it down. So, stress does things that we don't typically hear about. When you think of stress, you typically think of the big bag monster in the closet, the
Right.
thing that makes you sick. And that's pretty much somewhat true, but not really. It's not stressors that make us sick, because stressor just means stimuli,
Mm.
right? And so it's like, if you're getting sick from every stimuli, that has more to do about your inability to metabolize, to regulate, and to have boundaries than anything else. But stress does very interesting things. So stress, for example, is a pain reliever. It actually blocks the
Mm.
pain receptors, the neuroreceptors. So if you're like a little confused by this, I'll break it down a little further. So
Mm.
if you've ever gone for a run and you've had that endorphic high, and you're like, okay, part of that endorphic high is because it hurts to run.
Mm.
And it is harsh on the body. We're talking like major weight forces that you are putting on your gentle, fragile ligaments and bones, my friends. And so your body is brilliant enough, you are brilliant enough to release a lot of endorphins, which is essentially blocking the pain receptors. When you are in a state of stress, it is like running. When you are running, it is a state of stress. Let me put it that way.
Mm.
You are releasing endorphins that block pain receptors. The two most significant natural pain relievers that we produce in our body are from love and pain. So we're going to become addicted to things that help us relieve the pain or block the pain. So stress does that. It gives us energy. The first stage of a stress response is this big boost, like drinking a cup of coffee and then another cup of coffee. And it's like if you are feeling the malaise of life, if you are feeling like run down by life, damn, that's going to feel really good to
Mm.
finally feel some sense of energy. And it's free. You can get it wherever you want just by creating a little stress response. I mean, those two alone, let alone the fact that stress is a social glue. We bond through pain, we bond through stress. And
And when love
yeah,
hurts, that's double. You get double whammy
yeah,
there, you know?
yeah. When love hurts, why would we turn to love?
Right.
When love doesn't feel safe as the pain reliever, we only have one more option to go.
Mm. Yeah, when I look at the neurology neurology of this, basically the periaqueductal gray in the brainstem secretes and endorphins and
Endorphins, yeah.
enkephalins, and so when it anticipates pain, even emotional pain,
Mm-hmm.
it
Same,
fires
same.
that up. It fires up your
Yep.
norepinephrine. It fires up the anterior cingulate, the amygdala, the
Mhm.
insula, and I believe that the insula is going to show us a lot in the coming years as far as neuroscience goes. I think the
Yeah.
insula actually creates an emotional signature of pain in our bodies that
Mhm.
gets replicated. So for me, I have this purple, hot, red, painful pressure in my solar plexus that presses up on my heart and presses into my spine. And that is a remnant of my younger self.
Mhm.
That is the part of me that needs the healing. That's the
Mhm.
somatic reference point that I find in my body. And that's what allowed me to heal from chronic anxiety, was finding that, seeing it was my younger self, and then seeing, hearing, loving, and protecting that
Yeah.
younger version of me.
Mhm.
And through other things, cognitive stuff as well. But in general, it was like finding this place in my body. And
Yeah.
LSD showed it to me when I was, 10 years ago,
Mhm.
that this your anxiety isn't in your mind at all. It's
Mhm.
basically this state of alarm that's
Mhm.
stuck in your body, and unless you actually deal with that,
Mhm.
you're always going to be chasing your worries. You're always going to be in this sort of defensive adaptation state where you're
Mhm.
never really feeling calm or peaceful, because as a child, I couldn't trust calm and peace. So
Mhm.
when I got into it, it would create this alarm in me. So it was finding the root cause of that in my
Yeah.
body, in my soma, and going, okay, how do I fix this? So how do we heal? Like, that's what we started off with. But so how do we heal?
Well, I mean, healing is such a complex concept, and
Yes.
it's like, I was on a panel the other day talking about this, which I really appreciated, because it's like I think healing is not just universal,
Mm,
and
yeah.
healing comes from the word also remembering, like to wholeness and remembering. And so it's like remembering our wholeness, and recognizing the things that have gotten in the way or veiled that. And there's some concepts of healing that is like we fragment out. Like we know trauma is fragmenting. It
Mm,
fragments memory. It fragments body to body connection. And so there's this idea that is healing putting the puzzle pieces back together. Is that what healing is?
mm,
Meaning we were not whole and we're putting ourselves back into wholeness. Or we have always been whole, but there are things in the way of us experiencing them.
right.
And that's a very philosophical
Mhm.
difference. And it means that there are different pathways of healing.
Yeah, I come back to Dan Siegel's concept of integration, taking
Hmm.
disparate parts that are
Hmm.
kind of all over and they're not linked together, and pulling them into a functional whole again.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like when I have this thing of healing, because I say that I've healed my anxiety. And
Hmm.
it's basically, what it is that I see my worries as something that aren't me. That
Hmm.
I see them, and I see the seduction to believing them, to go into
Hmm.
them, to getting the hit, the dopamine hit through the nucleus accumbens, that you're on the right track. This pain in your gut is actually cancer. It's not just, some reflux.
Yeah.
You're on the right track. So you get this dopamine hit, and worrying, I think, is a way of making the uncertain a little more certain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many of us had such trouble with uncertainty when we were younger and just had no power over it. So we will do anything to
Mm-hmm.
avoid uncertainty. And worrying is one of the ways we avoid uncertainty. Also, it pulls us into our heads and it pulls us out of that place in our body that just really hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of my oldest definitions I've used for anxiety is the intolerance for the known and the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically the unknown. I mean, we know that one of the things that allows for that secure attachment, that sense of safety in ourselves, that allows us to be here in the present moment and grounded and connected to other people, one of the ingredients for that with a caregiver is consistency.
Mm.
Now, it goes back to this because consistency doesn't mean all the time, but enough. And here's the complicated thing is like we can be consistent enough because when we go back to the idea that everything, the natural order of the world, the universe is chaos. And chaos is not necessarily predictable. And predictable and consistency are not necessarily the same thing. And that's an important discernment in
Mm.
being a caregiver. It's like, I always come back and we repair. We can't guarantee what's going to be the rupture, but that's my consistency. And
And it
even the rupture, one time it's a pattern might create a rupture, and another time it might not. That's the unpredictable nature of things. But the
mm.
consistency is the guarantee that no matter what, I will put in my effort to do the repair.
And that's what we didn't get as children. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what we,
Mm-hmm.
when we were bullied, when we lost ourselves on some level and our
Mm-hmm.
parents or caregivers weren't there to create the repair.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading something the other day that said, relationships that people that have fight and repair are much stronger than
Mm-hmm.
relationships who don't fight.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
it's that repair piece, I think, that we so missed as children. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, when you have trauma as a child, you kind of lose faith in the world at that
Mm-hmm.
point. And then the natural corollary of that is that everything is up to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're 7 and everything is up to you. So of
Yeah.
course you're going to develop, anxiety, depression, OCD, all this sort of stuff that our kids are struggling with now, because you have to be able to have that security to know that most of the time, not all of the time, because that's, helicopter parents too. Like you don't want a parent that's always making sure that nothing ever happens to you either. So that's no good either. But it's really, can you rest in the fact that can you see the safety in safety? Because a lot of us don't see the safety in safety, and we get pulled back to the drama,
Mm-hmm.
and because it's familiar, and
Yeah.
because it creates all these chemicals in our brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most of us are missing cues of safety because we're so fixated on
Mm,
cues of danger.
right.
And for understandably so, especially if there wasn't the consistent present caregiver, then it's up to us to be the hypervigilant protector of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that dual role as kids is splitting.
Mm,
And it's like we build into that capacity as adults if we have the caregiver who takes on that role, and we get to be in the role of the child. And so if we have both between the caregiver and the child, that's where we get to, as an adult or as a young, even a old teenager, young
hmm
adult, form what we call self-regulation.
Yeah, I'm looking back at like Bruce Perry, who wrote a psychiatrist who wrote the book with Oprah, What Happened to You. He
Mm-hmm.
talks about the neurosequential model of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So your brainstem develops first. It's interesting that neural tube forms when we're
Mm-hmm.
embryos. So what I find really interesting about that is that the external becomes the internal as the neural tube involutes and forms the brain and spinal cord. What was actually touching the external is now becoming a representation of the external in the internal. So your brainstem, which controls your body, forms first. And if that forms in a milieu of unsafety, then your brainstem is kind of like this reactive protective thing. And then your emotional brain kind of forms on top of that like a helmet. And then your cortex forms on top of that like a helmet. And each one of those, if you form the brainstem in fear, your emotional system will form in fear, and then your cortex will form looking for fear. So you become this sort of, fear detector, and you get seduced by fear because that's the way your brain was formed. And to try and unlearn that and learn that safety is actually safe is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have as physicians, healers, psychologists, psychiatrists. And it's not easy, and it can't be done cognitively alone.
Now, I'm going to push back a little on that.
Good. Great.
As someone who spent many, many years studying embryology
Great.
as a main focus, I think it's a little simple, to be honest.
Oh, of course.
And I say simple because of this, because any listener who might be hearing that is going to say, oh my God, of course there was some fear in my environment, or of course there was some fear during that, like, very, during the 9 months of gestation,
Sure.
whatever. And it's like, okay, but there might have also been moments of happiness, and the neural tube invaginating or whatever, it was also incorporated that. So it's very unlikely that the entire gestation period and the total symphony of development was only having one cascade of emotion. And and so I want to be really clear, because one thing we can do is internalize the simplicity of it and go, oh my God, I'm fucked. Oh my God, my mom had some fear, or
Sure.
like the environment wasn't as safe, and therefore that, and start to rev ourselves up with the narrative of that, because it's something we also can't control, or typically change our embryological development process. I mean, I think we can, but that's up for debate between somatic therapists even.
Yeah. I mean, I was more referring to, like, if your mother is in a chronic state of stress.
And I will push back on that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I, as a psychologist as well, have never met someone that is constantly just in global activation. I think it's
No.
like we overgeneralize too much, and then we put this sort of like blame cycle on a parent and a mom. Yes, there are lots of people living in poverty, and other social implications and challenges that make it an unideal environment. However, that does not describe their capacity and resilience within themselves. And so it just is more nuanced than simply like someone who is quote unquote chronic stress. I just get a little nervous about making globalized statements, because that can be the narrative to which we use to rev ourselves up and away from kind of being true and present with, like, oh, I have some anxiety. How do I be with that, as opposed to the narrative that this parent fucked me up
Yeah.
in this embryological stage.
Sure. No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a risk factor than
Mhm.
sort of fait accompli. I think that
Yeah.
it's a risk factor in that, the people that I deal with specifically
Mhm.
are anxious people. And I
Sure.
look back into their history, and I look back into that. And I guess what I'm reassured by is that,
Yeah.
your genetics and your environment don't necessarily aren't necessarily a fait accompli, but your
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex, as it develops, has the least genetic influence.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's the most pliable
Mhm.
within your experience. So you can
Yeah.
change your experience
Yeah.
and change your prefrontal cortex,
Yeah.
and learn new glutamanergic projections, learn
Mhm.
new ways of interacting with things. But it's having the gumption to go in there and start changing, rather than sort of living your life as this kind of like, well, anxiety is a life sentence. I'm never
Yeah.
going to get rid of it, because
Yeah.
I've tried every type of, I've heard this so many times. I've tried so many different types of therapy, and nothing's really worked. And I said, well, have you ever tried somatic therapy or internal family systems? It's like, well,
Yeah.
no, I haven't, but I've seen my psychiatrist and my psychologist, and we're doing
Yeah.
CBT. And it's like, CBT will help you cope, but it's not going to help you heal. I mean, it will
Yeah.
help you heal, but it's not going to create, the ultimate healing that you need. And I think that's part of, what our society really focuses on. We worship the mind, and we kind of leave the body behind because we have a lot more references for the mind. We can use language to kind of poke into the mind. Feeling is much more amorphous, and feeling is where healing is, to rhyme something.
I always appreciate a good rhyme.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm just like, I think in the last 2 weeks, I've been really deconstructing healing more than I ever have before,
Mm,
and going, I thought I figured it out. I thought I figured it out for myself. I thought
right.
I figured it out as a doctor and a psychologist, and I'm like, I got this. I understand the pathway to healing. And I think lately which I love this phase of anything
Mm,
I research. I'm like, I don't think I don't think I know anymore. Or there's something like something's shifting
right.
enough to like to destabilize the sense of knowing. And I personally love those moments. It is like doing psychedelics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we are mind, body, spirit, right? And I think medicine specifically is good at the body,
Mm.
and the mind. Neuroscience. We've made tremendous advances in neuroscience in the last 20 years, but very little of that has actually bled into, using that term, into the clinical scenario, right?
Yeah.
So we know these tracks, we know the pathways, we know the anterior cingulate affects the amygdala, blah, 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 but it doesn't really give us a lot of treatment options knowing these
Mm.
tracks and pathways. So it's understanding, that we are spirit.
Mm.
There's a certain amount of just imbuing someone with the ability to heal themselves, rather than always looking at some sort of parental figure like a doctor or
Oh
whatever
yeah.
to heal them. Because I think there's that seduction, like, oh well, this person knows so much, they'll be able to heal me. And I think there is this part of us as children, when we don't get what we need as children, we're always thinking that the parent's going to come back. We always have this
Mm.
unconscious drive. So for some of my patients, and this is true for me too, is that I would just not take care of myself because I had this unconscious assumption that one day my dad was going to come back and be the dad that he was supposed to be. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of us have that. We hope that our parent is going to come back, and we realize that, as cliche as it sounds, you kind of have to be that parent. And if you're outsourcing your healing to someone else, you're never really going to get a grasp of it, because it has to come from inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It Yeah. I mean, I think healing happens in community. I think healing happens in relationship. And part of that relationship is the relationship we have with ourselves. And, one of the things that happens in any injury, I mean, emotional or physical, is that there is some version or level of disconnect,
Mm,
some form of rupture. Like you break your arm and you get this inflammatory response, and it's a well intended, but you are essentially sectioning your arm off from the rest of your body.
mm,
You have a heartbreak, you have a similar inflammatory response. There is a guarding that comes up. There's a bracing that is present, and that bracing is one of the symbols of bracing is protection.
mm,
And so it's like in its best intention, we are fragmenting ourselves, and in the same thing that happens in ruptures in relationships. So absolutely, healing happens in relationship. It happens in the repair to ourself from self-abandoning ourselves or having to protect ourselves, and recognizing the value of intent, and still acknowledging the consequences in any of these ways in which we have had to fragment or rupture a sense of wholeness or a sense of connection and relationship.
yeah, because what I often tell my anxiety people is that anxiety really results from a mind body separation. We
Mm.
don't want to go into our body because that's where the pain is. So we go up into our
Yeah.
heads and we overthink and over worry and ruminate. And it's also an adult self, child self separation as well.
Mm.
So to me, like, the healing is pulling your mind and body back together. So nutrition, things like, yoga,
Yeah.
breath work, all that kind of stuff too. But just really finding that younger version of you, and really seeing them, hearing them, loving them, understanding them, and understanding that the things that they did that they weren't proud of or whatever were reactions to try to get love, try to get connection. Because this whole thing about fawning, this sympathetic reaction to fawning, and Gordon Neufeld talks about this. He says that all anxiety is separation anxiety, for one, which I believe there's a separation within yourself, and it's finding that connection with yourself that allows you to kind of heal through this and become and engage that prefrontal cortex and use that neuroplasticity to start thinking about yourself in a different way, and just being aware that there's disparate parts of you. There's the adult, there's the child, there's the mind, there's the body, and how can you bring those back into connection? So with your anxious patients, Scott, what are the things that you use to kind of help them with anxiety?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind was a body metaphor that I've often used, which I say, like, what if anxiety and the sensation of it, so the signaling of it that you're experiencing, the fast-paced breathing, the rapid thoughts, all of that was the telephone ringing of your body waiting for you to pick it up and listen. And so, like, reframing anxiety as a signal of it has been significant, I found, of going, oh, so I'm not reacting to my reaction, or I'm not reacting to my anxiety. Rather, I'm utilizing that as a positive symbol to then attune deeper into myself. And I found that to be really powerful for folks, because a lot of times we have anxiety to our anxiety.
Yes.
That's
panic.
It's like a
That's
fucking
basically what panic
nightmare.
attacks. That's what panic attacks are. Yeah. It just cycles on itself, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that's what I really found interesting about being a physician and dealing with people with panic attacks is the first couple of times they have panic attacks, they're not panicked. They said, oh, I felt this really lightheaded feeling, and I felt really strange, like I couldn't, I couldn't feel my feet properly. And then I thought, what if I'm having a stroke? What if this is a heart attack? Then
that's revving. That's revving.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when it goes out of control. Yeah. And it's so intense, especially when you have it, especially when you have panic attacks as a young person. And you don't have that resilience and capacity yet to really understand that this is just a temporary situation of your nervous system. It really freaks them out, and the fear is so great that they're afraid so much of having another panic attack. And often what I would do with people is I would give them, a couple of tablets of benzodiazepine, like Ativan or Xanax or whatever, just to take when they would have it. And then often all they would need is they just knew they had it in their pocket.
Yeah.
They just knew that they had something that would actually calm this down, and it wasn't going to go on forever. And it was the fear of the fear. And anxiety is a lot of that as well. It's getting trapped in your head rather than going into your body and actually, this hurts, this pain, this solar plexus pain that I have, this is uncomfortable, but I can handle it. And I think that's where the real healing part of this has come from. It's like, oh, here it is. My natural reaction is to go up into my head and start ruminating and start worrying. But what if I just stayed with the pain? And Kathy Kane has this great thing called objecting without contracting, where she says there's this little squeezing, there's this little resistance that happens in my chest. And a lot of my patients feel this too. And it's like, can you just object to this? Can you not like it, but not resist it, like not push against it, not contract around it? Because I believe that this initial contraction, this little is what starts the cascade. And if you can consciously not get trapped into that early, quick contraction and stay with it, even though it hurts, that's when you start processing it. That's when you start metabolizing it. And then you get this feeling of anxiety in your body. And you're like, oh, I don't like this, but I can handle it. Now, initially, you can't handle it. It's overwhelming. This is the case with me. Is like it was just overwhelming. But over the course of time of going back into that feeling and allowing myself to feel it and staying with it, and then going into the counter vortex, finding a place in my body that wasn't, feeling this way, and pendulating back and forth between the two, among other techniques. But I just really found it. The people that I find that do best with anxiety are the ones that can tolerate that uncomfortable physical sensation, because that physical sensation is your younger self.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something as you're talking about that really reminds me to say, like, anxiousness is a normal feeling
Totally.
too. Like,
Totally.
like when we downgrade it to like, I'm anxious, cool. Tell me, like, get
Mm,
curious with it. So if anxious might mean like, I don't feel so secure in what I'm going to do, or I don't know if I have the skill sets to navigate it. There's an uncertainty about what's to come and how to best be with it. And like that's just a reframe technique. But
yeah.
it allows me to go, okay, I'm having a normal feeling. Like I feel anxious at times. Like
Mm,
I don't know if this is gonna go well. But I rarely have the anxiety of the anxiety because I'm like I really normalize and go to myself, yeah, anxiousness means that like I take a step back and I go, okay, what do I not feel secure or clear in my skill sets or my capacity to be
mm,
with this in? And
mm.
I'm like, okay, I have this big event coming. There's a lot of people. I haven't
Right.
been around this many people in a long time. I don't
I
remember
get you,
if I
baby. I
have the
feel it. I feel you.
capacity,
Yeah.
like the social bandwidth, the social battery.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, think back for a moment. When was the last time I felt like I had a big social battery? All right, I was around this many people 10 years ago.
Mm,
All right, so I know it's there. Maybe it's not practiced, but I know I have some history with it. What's it like to take that old sense and just apply it to the future memory? So the projection of what's to come. I'm like, okay, I feel a little better. Now, it's when I get to that event, I might still feel anxious, but I've at least built up some capacity because I haven't been pre-gaming myself with a flood of anxiety.
right. And you don't go into this, it doesn't snowball
It doesn't
on you as far
snowball.
as that goes. I
Yeah.
mean, I did stand up for 10 years as a
Yeah.
professional comic and toured with Yuck Yucks in Canada and that kind of thing. And if I wasn't feeling anxious before I opened that curtain, I knew it wasn't going to be a very good set.
I know
So you
exactly
have
what
to
you
have
mean.
that. Yeah, but I think
Oh.
anxious people overgeneralize
Mhm,
excitement a lot of the time. People say excitement and anxiety are the same thing. They're not,
mhm.
but they have enough overlap
That
that
people
they can trigger each other, especially if you've been potentiated or sensitized to have
mhm,
an anxious nervous system. And then your confirmation bias kicks in, which is
mhm,
basically, okay, I'm just before I'm going on stage. It's like, oh, this is gonna go terrible. They're a younger crowd. They're gonna hate me. So you get this confirmation. Your brain is this meaning making, make sense machine. So when you feel this angst, your
mm,
brain has to get a story. It's got to do something with that. And what I've learned is that no, you don't have to. You can just stay in your body. You can put your hand on it. You can breathe into it. You can stay with it. You can enjoy the pain. Like that's one of the things that I think has really helped me get past anxiety is learning how to enjoy that pain because my periaqueductal brain does start boosting out endorphins and enkephalins and that kind of thing. So
yeah,
again, it is a cognitive reframe on some level, but it's really about allowing yourself to feel, like allowing yourself to, because if you never actually allow yourself to feel it, you're always going to be afraid of it and you're never going to be able to metabolize it. And then your confirmation bias is always going to look for a reason why you feel this way because it's so uncomfortable to stay in your body. You shoot up into your head, which is what you did as a child, and you will ride that program until the wheels fall off, and the wheels do fall off.
mm. What they do.
So this event, Scott, where is it? What is it? Can people get involved with it? Like, can they find it?
Yeah, it's sold out live, but we are also live streaming it and it will be on the Embody Lab, so
Okay.
the embodylab.com. And you can, attend to it live or watch it after. It's yours for life. And I again, I'm really excited to like enter into this in a few weeks with just like a more openness than I ever felt around what is healing, as opposed to like this confirmed idea and
Totally.
thesis to which I have written many of around the
Yes.
subject.
Yes. And it's an amazing lineup too. Like you have
Yeah.
Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk
Hmm.
and Peter Levine, like the heavy hitters in therapy for sure. So I'm
Heavy
sure it'll be an
hitters.
amazing event.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
And
such a funny idea
I
to
know.
like we think of to take that sort of baseball analogy
Right.
or that baseball reference and apply it to like trauma healing.
1,000%.
Yeah, but
So,
I love it.
so how do people find you, Scott? Your book is Addicted to Trauma
Mhm.
and Addicted to
Yeah,
Drama. Yeah,
addicted to
yeah.
drama.
I always get it mixed up. Yeah, Addicted to
Yeah,
Drama.
we
And how
chase
can
the
people find
drama
you?
to avoid our trauma and so
Exactly.
addicted to drama. Yeah. Yeah, I'm on socials at Dr. Scott Lyons on Instagram,
Lyons. Yeah.
Lyons, yeah.
Yeah.
And I hear I'm on TikTok as well.
Okay.
And I hear through the grapevine. And my website is drscottlyons.com. And my podcast is another place to find me, The Gently Used Human, which you have been
I've been
on, which was
on.
a great
Yes.
episode.
Thank you.
And the Embody Lab is another place you can find me, which is my online platform for somatic education and therapy, accessible to everyone in any profession.
Well, thanks, Scott, and thanks
Yeah.
so much for all your work. Right,
Oh,
like
thank you.
your list of accomplishments is great. Your background is amazing, and I think you've got this really wonderful combination of art and science to you. The
Oh,
ability to kind of, because you've been there, right? And I think the people that are the best teachers are the ones that have been there themselves and have
yeah.
kind of said, "This is how I found my way out."
Yeah.
So, thanks, man. I really appreciate your work. I appreciate the dedication that you have put into it. And I hope that you get a bit of a rest coming up over the next little while, because you're going to get more and more and more popular. So you're going to have to learn to be addicted to your own kind of drama and be able to kind of, just look at like how much do I have to put into my work and how much do I have to put into my social life. And I think that you've done a great job of, kind of managing the success as it's coming, and you're just going to get more and more. So
That's so
congratulations.
sweet.
Good luck with the event,
Thank you.
and hopefully we'll talk again in the future very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
Anytime, Scott. Bye for now.